Well, hello everybody, we're getting ready to start Occupy Forum here in San Francisco at 1005 Guerrero at 22nd Street. So if you're in the neighborhood, stop by. Hi Ruthie. I got a terrible toothache tonight, so I'm not going to be doing too much commentary, but I shouldn't have to. And it's a lovely cafe, and so you can sit back and enjoy the speakers that we're having tonight. Occupy the Forum. I don't know if you can see that up there. They'll be talking about the Fed, the banks, and banksters. So do join in and check out the show. So I'm just going to leave it quiet for now. I don't really want to do a whole lot of talking, but we will be getting started here in just a couple of minutes.
Oh, you're basically. Just keep doing it, There's all kinds of things happening. And I gotta work the counter. Talking. I guess there might be an information probably. So I think there might be an
It looks like we got a nice little crowd tonight.
You're talking about transaction tax? Yeah, that's great. It's a great
Welcome to our viewers. We're here at Occupy Forum at 1005 Guerrero Street here in San Francisco. We're about ready to start the forum, which will be talking about the banks, banksters, and the Fed. So we'll be on for the next 2 hours. So do join in. If you'd like to comment, enter on the social stream at the right of the video, and you can chat, log in and chat there. Thanks. Now we're getting ready to start the forum for the viewers that are watching. So just hang on and we'll be starting in a few minutes. It looks like our panel is already seated up at the front. We'll be starting in just a few seconds.
I'm doing good.
And for those of you that just tuned in, we're web streaming, live streaming Occupy Forum here from 1005 Guerrero Street in the Mission District in San Francisco. We will be starting in just a couple of minutes, so hang on and we'll have something going on in here in just a second. And thanks for watching.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, and my sinus is okay.
Feel better.
Okay, thanks.
And if you'd like to, if you have a question that you'd like to ask towards the end of the forum, please log in and then you can chat or get on the social stream to communicate with me if you have any questions for the speakers that we're having tonight. They'll be speaking on the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the banks and banksters, and the current financial situation worldwide, which promises to be a very interesting talk tonight. And hopefully we can get people educated about what's going on with our monetary system here in the United States and around the world.
We're going to do a workshop in February to follow to this. How to build a strategy. It doesn't say that on the simple task. But all I it's possible to do it earlier so that it can be circulated. Otherwise, it will take hours. I know it's easy that.
Sorry? As opposed to the non-rail news. As opposed to the unreal news, right? Yeah, I've been involved in a lot of, there's been a lot of online discussion about what happened Friday. And, well, I think we finally got the message out that you can't have gun control. It has to be tied in with mental health services. Because the guy that did all the shooting, his mother was the one that had all the guns. His mother was a survivalist, right? A survivalist. And he had already been turned down for a gun permit in New Jersey. Survivalist. His mother was. And he had already been turned down for a gun permit to buy a gun in New Jersey. So, yeah, you can't say gun control didn't work, right? So you got all these liberals out there calling for gun control, but they're not asking for any, like, dollar increase in mental health services, right? No dollars for mental health services, right? Right? Because if you could get mental health services as easy as you can get a gun, well then maybe society will change a little bit.
After that, not making you talk. Did you get my email about sitting Well, that's fine. You have the pictures and you move on and it's fine.
Well, folks, we're getting ready to get started here. Just be patient. We're just getting ready to get started, so please be patient and hang in there.
Regardless of where the forum is?
And the forum will be starting here in just a couple of minutes. So thanks for logging on, and if you have any questions that you would like to ask for later on in the broadcast, please log in to the social stream to the right and let me know, and I'll be sure to make sure your questions get heard and answered, hopefully. No, I didn't hear about that, Abby Sonic. Sounds interesting. I think there's a lot more to this story than just some guy walking into a school and killing people. It's pretty obvious, because nobody commits that magnitude of a crime unless they've got like some kind of forethought. They thought about it and they had some kind of psychological problem or reason. So at any rate, we need more money for mental health services and less money for bombs. And tax the 1% to pay for it, because they're the reason why we lost most of our mental health services. We used to have a pretty good mental health service system here in San Francisco, and slowly but surely by the years, it's been decimated through budget cuts. You used to be able to get treatment on demand here in San Francisco. Now to get a chance to see a psychiatrist, you actually have to be 5150 at the only clinic that's left is at San Francisco General Hospital. And there's a definite need for mental health services, especially here in San Francisco, because we got more crazy people running down the street talking to themselves, to the point where it's almost socially acceptable to walk down the street talking to yourself nowadays. So, and we do have the strictest gun laws here in the country in San Francisco. You can get 5 years for merely being in possession of an unregistered firearm. So I can't really see what more gun control is going to do to solve the situation here in San Francisco, when we actually had another murder that happened here the night before last in the Bayview district. So there you go. And thank you everybody for watching. We are going to get ready, get going here in just a minute or two, hopefully. Damn anarchists, they're always late. 5150. Thanks for watching, Bob. Glad you're here. Just make sure if anybody's got a question or anything that they'd like to ask at the end of the presentation, I'll make sure that you get heard and that your questions maybe will be answered. So thanks for joining. I'm not going to do too much more talking. I'm in a lot of dental pain right now, and I took a couple of oxys before I got down here just to make sure I can get down here.
Hello. Welcome to Occupy Forum. Turn it down a little. Thank you all for coming. Can you hear me okay, or is this too loud? Okay, we are really happy to be here tonight on this really important issue. Back to the Occupy basics. the Fed, the banks, and the banksters. And we want to understand how the Fed works, how the 1% of the banks are controlling our money to the detriment of the 99%. We have some wonderful, great speakers here that we're so glad they can make it. Unfortunately, Jane Smith, who was our speaker on the Fed itself, has a really, really sore throat and cannot speak. So that's okay. We are going to show some videos instead to explain the Fed. So we have Susan Harmon, the National Volunteer Coordinator for the Public Banking Institute, and she will be speaking on the creation of public banks and the need to create public banks. We have Beezer DiMartelli. She is a master's student at Berkeley, and she will be speaking on debt resistance and what students are doing, organizing strike debt assemblies. And we have Alex Rokowski. Close enough, I guess. Rokowski. He is one of the authors of the groundbreaking report, Swapping Our Future. He is a master's student at Berkeley. This report, Swapping Our Future, has its 5 authors, and it goes into some of the intricacies of how swaps are draining funds from our municipalities, our public institutions, to the detriment of the students and social services. So without further ado, well, with one further ado, we will be passing a hat around at some point because we do have some costs, like for this system at Occupy Forum. We are also looking for a new home. So if anybody has ideas of possible places for future forums, please let us know. Is that about it? Yeah, so.
My stuff.
Oh, yes, and thank you. Andy would like to tell you a little bit about the food in the cafe.
That's how we're paying our rent tonight. So.
Yeah. We're offering this place for free, but in order to for me to get this place, the boss likes to see a little revenue, and you guys have been great. So if you do want to order anything, especially food, if you do that within the next half hour, that would be great. And also don't forget the tip jar here, because Anna has graciously agreed to stay, but she's being paid minimum wage, and so the tip jar will augment her salary. Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, and my name is Beth, I don't know if I said that, been in Occupy since last year, and we thank Ruthie and Ethan and David, the organizers of the forum, and we'll have Q&A at the end, and if people have announcements for upcoming events, there'll be some time for that. So we'll start with the film. Thank you.
Probably turn the lights up.
Can you turn the lights off?
There we go.
Of our new show. Please know, we're in the midst of our fundraising campaign for 2012. We have a $100,000 matching grant. 2013. Now, we are going to begin. And we are told that we're about to go over the cliff, a fiscal cliff, and we need to have massive reform to entitlement programs, Social Security, and others. Now joining us to discuss the crisis, we are told, is Michael Hudson. Michael was a Wall Street financial analyst and is now a distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. His newest book is The Bubble and Beyond. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thank you very much, Paul.
So are we going off the cliff?
Well, there isn't any cliff to go off, but for people who believe that a crisis is an opportunity, in order to get the opportunity to shift the taxes more onto the middle class, they have to call it a crisis. Of course, there's no crisis at all.
Okay, well, they say there is, because they say there's going to be these automatic massive cuts to the military, and there's going to be these massive cuts to social programs and such. And so what is the reality of that?
Well, because of the way that Mr. Obama worked with the Republicans to negotiate a crisis pre-planned in advance, yes, indeed, by the end of the year, there would be a reversal of the Bush tax cuts for the richest Americans. There would be ostensibly a cutback. That would last, I think, about one day from December 31st to the time the new Congress meets. So they'd hardly skip a beat before they then set to making whatever the new deal would be. The whole idea is to make it appear as if there's a crisis, to make it appear as if Obama has to give in to the Republicans to essentially become what Mitt Romney would have become if he would have been elected. So Obama's playing the role of Romney Light and saying we've got to cut taxes on the rich, and the only way we can balance the budget if we give it to my campaign contributors, Wall Street, is to shift the taxes much more onto the working class. We have to take more of their paychecks on the FICA withholding, and we have to raise the retirement age and cut the benefits to Social Security.
Okay, so
so what he's saying is we've given $13 trillion of new debt in giveaway to the banks since September of 2008, but we can't create a single penny to reimburse the Social Security contributors for the money that they've actually contributed. We can only create fictitious money for our campaign contributors, not the voters.
Okay,
Sorry, voters,
so
you weren't the campaign contributors.
So explain that a little more, because that's such an important point, that if in fact Social Security is in some kind of mod, which some are claiming is unsustainable, a lot of that has to do with the money that was taken out of it not to give people Social Security.
Well, here's the question of what does it mean to be sustainable? How were we able to fight World War II or the $3 trillion Iraq War without taxing? The answer is the Federal Reserve simply creates the money. Now, right now, the Social Security Administration has saved an enormous amount of extra withholding from paychecks over and above what was needed to pay out Social Security. And this money was used essentially as tax cuts for the rich. So by taxing the wage earners more, President George Bush was able to slash, and before him, Clinton, and before him, his father, were able to slash tax rates for the higher tax brackets. And essentially, what people call the Social Security fund is really a tax shift. You don't want to call it a tax on the poor, but it's not for Social Security. Not a penny of that has been spent on Social Security. Every single penny of the Social Security Trust Fund has been collected extra as a tax that falls on wage earners that are higher than the taxes that the wealthiest people paid, higher than the tax that George Romney pays, higher than the tax that Warren Buffett pays. And all this is George W. Bush said, you know, the Social Security Trust Fund really doesn't exist at all. It's just an IOU. And these funds are non-marketable Treasury securities. And as people begin to retire and run down the fund, what happens is the Treasury simply spends down its balance at the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve does exactly what it did when it took on the $13 trillion Wall Street. It just prints the money. There's no need to tax the money to pay Social Security. The government simply spends it into the economy. That's what central banks do. That's what the Bank of England does. It's what the Federal Reserve does. So why is it that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury can create all this money to pay Wall Street and they can't create a penny for Social Security?
So what's the real objective?
Almost comical.
So what's the real objective in Social Security reform? Because there's obvious other ways to be cutting the debt if cutting the debt is such a big deal. But the targeting of Social Security, what's the real objective here?
It's to put the class war back in business. It's to essentially say, well, we only want to spend money on the 1%. We don't want to spend any money on the 99%. The 99%'s role is to pay taxes. The 1%'s role is to get these taxes in the form of bailouts, subsidies, special spending, like rebuilding all of the beach homes and rebuilding all of the private beaches in New Jersey, not the public beaches, but the private beaches and the private homes. essentially,
But
the 1% is a giveaway.
but part of the issue here seems to be from the Republicans, the push to privatize, and there are now some Democrats that are apparently making similar murmurs about sort of privatizing light and that. What is this? What's behind this move to privatize?
The idea is the same one that had pension fund capitalism in the 1950s. From the time that General Motors started its pension funds, there's been a tidal wave of pension fund contributions into the stock market. That created a stock market boom in the 50s, in the 60s, into the 70s. And I discussed that in my book on the bubble and beyond. But now the pension funds are all being downsized. How are you going to create a pension fund, a stock market boom? The idea of privatizing Social Security is to give Wall Street the biggest clientele that it's got in history. It will be the biggest giveaway in history to Wall Street, and not only will they push this money into the stock market while more people are paying in, pushing into a stock market boom, but at the same time, the Wall Street banks like Citicorp and Bank of America can treat its customers like counterparties. They can gouge them on fees. They can then stick them into stocks that they then, all of a sudden, the day will come when more people begin to retire than pay into the plan, and at that point the stock markets are going to begin to go down. Then all of a sudden the Wall Street speculators can dump the stocks, pull their money out, and leave the Social Security retirees holding an empty bag, and the government will say, well, that's the madness of crowds. And it's not the madness of crowds, it's a Wall Street scam, and that scam is being put in place by an enormously well-subsidized propaganda campaign to convince people that it's necessary for them to become suckers for the Wall Street money managers.
Now, is there any sense or evidence that Obama or Biden are going to compromise with this? In the election campaign, I thought they were both pretty clear they're against the voucher system, which is sort of the form or model of privatization that the Republicans are advocating.
I think the voucher system you're talking about is for Medicare and for Medicaid, not Social Security. So what are we talking about now?
Well, I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry, not voucher, but to create this, to create Social Security as a private fund that people can invest. And I thought Obama and Biden said they would not support that.
Yeah, I think that's correct. This is a Republican plan. I don't think it's a Democratic plan to support privatization. Look, when the Republicans say, look at Shelley, that's a wonderful thing to do. Every single pension plan put in by Pinochet's party at gunpoint in the 1970s, every one was looted by the employers and by the banks and went bankrupt by the end of the 1970s. That's why the Chilean voters threw out the party and voted for the socialists who were against doing this. So all you have to do is look at Chile. But of course the Republicans are looking at Chile and saying, my God, we can put all of the private money into the pension funds to be Social Security funds to be invested, and then we can steal it all. We can steal trillions of dollars. We can get richer than we've ever dreamed of if we can only have the right to steal. And that's what this is. What they're talking about Social Security reform is theft. And that's what it should be called, theft.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Michael.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.
So that was a little bit off topic, but we wanted to get across the issue of the fiscal cliff propaganda, because I don't know about you guys, but whenever I see something over and over and over again in the press with the same buzzword, it seems that there's something suspicious behind it. So now Susan was going to take a few minutes to talk about the Federal Reserve, and then we're going to cue up the video on the Federal Reserve.
I'm sorry, can you tell me the date of this particular, with Michael Hudson?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
Okay. Sure.
Hi, I'm Susan Harmon, and I work with the Public Banking Institute. I don't know a huge amount about the Fed, but I do know that it's neither federal nor has any reserve, unlike its title. It's a consortium of the biggest private banks around the country. It has 12 branches. There's one in San Francisco. And it's run by the banks. It collaborates with the Treasury Department on some issues, but it is a private institution. It was set up that way in 1913, and it was pushed through almost on the eve of Congress's Christmas vacation. So it's another one of those sneaky takeovers of our country by the private bankers. They, as Michael Hudson was saying, well, he said they print money. They really don't bother printing money anymore. It's just keystrokes on a computer. But they shifted huge amounts of money to the private banks in the QE2, the two first QE2s, the bailouts. They could be doing the same thing, and this is something that we would support. They could be giving that kind of money to the public in the form of WPA projects, in infrastructure projects, which we desperately need at this point. That would create jobs, which is what we also desperately need. The economy is collapsing because we don't have enough jobs. The salaries that we already have been lowered in the last decade dramatically. So even if people were producing goods, there's nobody to buy them. We don't have the money to buy stuff. So everything has just ground to a halt, and Wall Street isn't investing in America at this point. They're either sitting on their money or putting it all abroad in various investments. So the Fed is our national bank. It's just that it's not public like other national banks around the world. It's private. So it does what Wall Street wants and not what we need.
Could I recommend a book? William Greider, Secrets of the Temple. Federal Reserve is the temple. Greider. William Greider. His other book is Who Will Tell the People? Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the book again?
Secrets of the Temple. There's another one, Left Hook by Dean Henderson, The Federal Reserve Cartel. Big Oil's Big Bankers. Dean Henderson, Left Hook.
Henderson or Anderson?
Henderson.
Thank you.
He also has a Kill JFK.
Do we need new poverty programs? What kind of poverty programs are you in strong support of?
Jobs. A job is the solution to poverty for individuals, for the country. We need to get America back to work. So the bill that I introduced yesterday, I'd like to talk about, if I may, is called the NEED Act, the National Employment Emergency Defense Act, that would put the Fed back, it would put the Fed under Treasury, so it wouldn't have this ability to be able to give $1.2 trillion to banks secretly. Bloomberg News found out about it and unearthed it. That this financial game wouldn't be an end game in itself, and that the government would at last take back the power it gave away in 1913 to be able to invest directly to create the jobs. Just think about this, John. If we'd be borrowing money from banks when the Constitution of the United States gives the power to coin money or create money to the Congress, and we ought to, as a government, be investing in our own country. We should not have to go to China to borrow money to invest in America. We should create the wealth in our own country. There shouldn't be any level of unemployment here. We should be able to get America back to work. This is something, I got the bill in, I really...
And as I understand, the bill would essentially dismantle the Federal Reserve, correct, and move it under Treasury, and do away with the bond market, correct?
Well, no, it would create a separate monetary authority. People could still, invest in various private projects that have to do with the bond market. This isn't about eliminating the bond market by any means, but it is a way of creating millions of good-paying jobs, of paying off the national debt, of reducing federal deficits, of ending the fiscal crisis, and having the dollar be a stable currency. But the Fed right now is out of control. The Fed stood on the sidelines while a bubble was building, and banks were pyramiding their assets, and then when it collapsed, what did? They went to the taxpayer and said, bail us out. Well, we still have banks that are too big to fail. We still have banks that are not loaning money or helping people stay in their homes. They're standing by trying to, not standing by, they're pushing and accelerating the number of foreclosures so that they can clear out the housing market to set the stage for another boom-bust cycle. I reject that. We should have had mortgage modification in the works right from the beginning. We need to save American homes, but we need to do something else. Give people a chance to have a job so they can make their mortgage payment. Give people a chance to have a job so they can make their car payments and send their child to school. So they don't have to worry about their own economic security. But our government hasn't been doing that. It's been letting a central bank play games with other banks so that banks can get bigger, they can do their mergers and acquisitions, but then the hell with Main Street. Well, that's not to me, and it's time that we had a government that really stood for the American people and didn't permit these banks to be running the country for their own benefit.
Let's get some reaction to that. John is a Republican.
Yeah, cut the Republicans off. We already know what they're going to say anyway.
We have, there's a video by a 10-year-old named Victoria Grant in Canada, and she explains in very concrete terms, it's based on the Canadian system, but she explained, it's transferable to the system we have in the U.S. So it's just a 7-minute video.
She was speaking at the Public Banking Institute conference last spring.
It was about 5 or 6 weeks ago that Victoria spoke to a group of 600 people at a Rotary Club, and she's going to be giving the same speech to us today. And I saw it, I think a week or so after it hit the web, it started going around, and so I quickly got on the phone and talked with her dad, Zane, and invited him here. And so we have a very special treat. So Victoria, come on up, do your thing.
Have you ever wondered why Canada is in debt? Have you ever wondered why the government forces Canadians to pay so many taxes? Have you ever wondered why the bankers from the largest private banks are becoming wealthier and the rest of us are not? Have you ever wondered why the gross national debt is over $800 billion? Or why we are spending $160 million a day on the interest of the national debt? That's $60 billion a year. Have you ever wondered who receives the $60 billion? What I have discovered is the banks and the government have colluded to financially enslave the people of Canada. I will share with you 3 important points of reference, which will hopefully spark enough interest and concern for you to continue the research on your own and to engage your government to stop this criminal act against the people of Canada. First, we will briefly examine the Bank of Canada. Second, we will see how our banking system works today. And lastly, I will offer a viable solution that we can petition our government to implement. A very little known figure in Canadian history is J.O. Grattan-McGeer. He was a lawyer, Member of Parliament, and Mayor of Vancouver. His contribution to Canada is probably the greatest in our history. He championed the creation of the National Bank of Canada, whose sole purpose is to create and manage Canada's money. It was formed on July 3rd, 1934, and owned by all Canadians. Until the 1970s, because of the Bank of Canada, Canada's national debt was held at a constant, manageable level, until the government decided to implement what we now have as our modern-day banking system that is robbing the Canadian people. So how are they robbing us? Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gives the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a debt pledge or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Grant Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. What I find interesting is even Jesus in Matthew 21 drove up the money changers in the temples because they were manipulating the currency to steal money from the people. The private banks are just like the money changers in Matthew 21. They are defrauding and robbing the people of Canada, thus their freedom, and they need to be stopped. How should the banking system work? In an infamous interview, Mr. McGeer asked Mr. Towers, "Can you tell me why a government with power to create money should give that power away to a private monopoly and then borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy?" Mr. Towers replied, "If Parliament wants to change the form of operating the banking system, then certainly that is within the powers of Parliament." In other words, if the Canadian government needs money, they can borrow it directly from the Bank of Canada. The people would then pay fair taxes to repay the Bank of Canada. This tax money would in turn get injected back into our economic infrastructure and the debt would be wiped out. Canadians would again prosper with real money as the foundation of our economic structure and not debt money. Regarding the debt money owed to the private banks, such as the Royal Bank, we would simply have the Bank of Canada print the money owing, hand it over to the private banks, and then clear the debt with the Bank of Canada. And yes, we have the power and lawful right to do so. In conclusion, it has become painfully obvious, even for me, a 12-year-old Canadian, that we are being defrauded and robbed by the banking system and a complicit government. What will we do to stop this crime? What will we do to ensure that the next generation will live free and clear of a debt-based economy that enslaves them to the banks? Margaret Mead said the following, and I hope that all of you remember this. "Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you.
So I think what she explained we can definitely transfer to how the Federal Reserve works. Jane Smith from the Ideological Liberation Working Group was going to go over some of the mechanics, so we'll have to bring her back when she's not deathly ill. And she also is the mastermind behind the Financial Crimes series, the Financial Crimes cards, which have been going around to Occupy. There's, I believe, 9 now. And you can review those to see who the actual banksters are, who are behind some of the system, and there'll be more in that series coming out. So now I'd like to introduce Alex Rocasi to speak about swapping our future and some of the market manipulation and LIBOR issues.
If it's light, it would be nice.
Hi, I'm Alex. Can everyone hear me if I just speak without the microphone? Yeah. All right, let me know if you can. And I'll stood up. Okay, I can do that. So most of what I'm going to talk about is built around a report that a few of my fellow graduate students and I wrote recently called Swapping Our Future, how students and taxpayers are funding risky UC borrowing and Wall Street profits. So I'm just going to pass it to you around. Feel free to take one and share it with your friends. I'll tell you now, though, that because it's not in the report, if you want to send it along, you can access the report online at, it's pretty easy, it's Public Sociology, one word, publicsociology.berkeley.edu. And there's also a few other reports on there that graduate students in sociology have published over the years that you might find.
Is your website written in?
It's not in there, so you might want to write it down.
Okay. Say it again.
I'll say it one more time. It's publicsociology.berkeley.edu. So most of what I'm going to say is sort of based off this report, so you can find more detail in there. But I'm going to talk about some more general trends that I think are not only evidenced in the case of the University of California, but are seen across a number of different public organizations in the United States. So what I'm going to talk about basically is what I'm going to call the financialization of public organizations, and I'll explain a little bit what I mean about financialization. But in a nutshell, it has to do with the way public organizations interface with financial markets. And I'm going to make the argument that the way that interface works threatens the ability of public organizations to undertake their mission in two different ways. It exposes them to risks that can undermine their ability to pursue their mission, but it also can distract the organization from its core mission in the first place, leading it to think it's supposed to serve interests that it's not actually supposed to serve. So I'm going to sort of illustrate, the report is specifically about a type of financial derivative product called an interest rate swap. And so most of what I'll say about the University of California is how it's come to use interest rate swaps in its financial strategy, and sort of what that's entailed for the livelihood of the university, its workers, and its students. So what I mean by financialization. People use this word in sociology to describe a couple different things. People use it to describe a change in sort of the macro economy. And usually what that means is that the revenues and profits that are being generated in the economy are increasingly being done so in financial pursuits as opposed to exchange or commodity production. But financialization can also describe how organizations work themselves. So most people talk about the financialization of firms. And that can mean a couple different things. On the one hand, it can mean how a firm makes its money. So think of a company like General Motors. What does General Motors make? Cars. How does General Motors make its money?
Selling cars.
Not even.
No,
By selling
money
loans, right, to finance cars, right. So the way General Motors makes most of its money is through what used to be GMAT. So General Motors made a lot of cars virtually at cost, and would make a lot of money selling car loans to the people who bought their cars. So this is one way you describe the financialization of a company. But it also has implications for who controls that company. So people talk about financialization when they talk about the rise of shareholder value as a mode of corporate governance, which is to say that it's no longer the workers who are controlling firms, if they ever were. It's not even the managers who are controlling firms, but it's shareholders, who are an increasingly abstract and volatile population. So I believe that it's fair to say that public organizations are also becoming financialized, although it's not totally clear what that means yet. And we haven't figured it out in part because it's somewhat new. But it is very real, and it's not just because public organizations are operating in an increasingly financialized environment, it's because they're financializing from the inside out. Which is not exactly to say that they're making money in finance, but that financial markets are an increasingly important part of their daily operations. And that's certainly true in the case of UC. Why is this happening? I think it's partly because public organizations are borrowing models from the private sector, but it's also because we're bringing in the very personnel from the private sector who are instrumental to implementing these strategies. Which is to say, the people who are in charge of UC's financial management are former banking institutions.
Really?
I'll say a little bit more about that later.
Wow.
It's pretty ugly.
Can you say it again?
I'll say it a few more times.
Important.
The people who manage UC's finances are former banking executives. Specifically, the very same banking executives who were in charge of public sector banking, which is to say, the parts of these banks who are selling the financial instruments that I'm going to be talking about later. One more time. The people who sold us the toxic financial instruments are the very same people who are now in charge of getting us out.
What's
Or
the
not.
name?
Peter Taylor.
Yeah. You'll see their faces in the report. So, and I think, but of course public organizations are different than private organizations. Private organizations have one, maybe two missions. The first is to make money, the second is to survive. And I would argue that's somewhat secondary to making money. Whereas public organizations usually have a mission. Usually that mission is made explicit in a statement and usually has something to do with serving the public. And so the financialization of public organizations is playing out somewhat differently than private organizations, I'm going to argue. And in two ways. Like I said before, it threatens their ability to pursue their mission, but it also distracts them from pursuing their mission. So I said I was going to talk about interest rate swaps, because I think that's the best way to get at sort of how the university is financialized. The university started using financial interest rate swaps around 2003. Yes, sorry.
Could you define that term first?
I am.
Thank you.
They started using them in 2003 as a way to sort of help advance a more aggressive borrowing agenda. Explain what an interest rate swap is and sort of why a public organization would buy it. So a swap in general, you've probably heard of a lot of different kinds of swaps. You're most likely to have heard of a credit default swap. But a swap as a family of financial instruments basically involves exchanging between two parties cash flow from that is referenced to a financial instrument. So one type of swap is a currency swap, where people are exchanging cash payments based on fluctuation in exchange rates. An interest rate swap is where, for example, let's say I'm a borrower and let's say so I'll explain basically how these work. I'll do my best and help me out. Let me know if I'm not
Pretend we're in the
explaining
third
myself.
grade, okay?
Right, okay. Here's how it works.
First.
Let's say, so I'm going to explain how interest rate swaps are used by public organizations, which is specifically as a way for hedging risk. Now they're used in a lot of ways, and mostly on Wall Street they're used for financial speculation, and I won't get into it. But the way public organizations use interest rate swaps is like this. Public organizations need to borrow money to fund all kinds of things, usually development. And the way they usually borrow money is by issuing a bond. Just like most other loans, you can issue a bond that either has a variable or fixed rate interest, or fixed interest rate. Fixed interest rates tend to be safer, but also somewhat more expensive. Variable interest rates you can usually get at a lower rate, but they also go up and down, so they're risky. Public institutions rarely borrow with variable interest rates because they don't want to adopt that risk, unlike private organizations, because they're obliged to serve some social mission. But if you want to get cheaper money and hedge your risk, what you do is you buy a variable rate, or you issue a variable rate bond, which is like taking out a variable rate loan, and then you insure it with an interest rate swap. And the way this works is this. Let's say I'm the University of California, and I want to borrow money, but I want to get a better rate on my loan. So I issue a bond. And let's say Beezer is everyone who buys my bond, which is mostly pensions. So they give me a lot of money, and I'm obliged to pay variable rate interest to Beezer. But I'm not totally cool with the fact that that interest rate could potentially go up, because it would undermine my ability to operate on a daily basis. So then, what's your name?
Karen.
Karen. So I come to Karen. Let's say Karen is Lehman Brothers. Sorry.
That's right.
So I come to Lehman Brothers and I say, hey, I'll pay you a fixed rate, and you pay me back a variable rate.
Hold
And
it.
of course,
Wait, okay. You see is going to sell me a bond. I'm going to give you money.
So I already issued my bond.
Oh.
So the lending relationship is here.
Oh.
Yeah, there's basically two relationships going on. There's the lending relationship between the public institution, which has issued the bond, and everyone who's bought the bond, which is to say they've effectively lent the public institution that money.
Right.
So this is the lending-borrowing relationship here, where I'm the borrower and Beezer's the lender. Okay? So that's a separate agreement. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to buy an interest rate swap. And I do that with a bank.
I'm a bank.
Right, you're Lehman Brothers.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I say, okay, I'm paying this variable interest rate over here, but I don't want to be paying a variable interest rate because I'm afraid it might go up.
Right.
So what I say is, how about this? I agree to pay you a fixed rate. Let's call it 4%. And then you pay me back a variable interest rate, which I, of course, then use to pay Visa. So what I've effectively done is turned a variable rate loan into a fixed rate loan. Does that make sense? You're basically turning a variable rate loan into a fixed rate loan. And when you borrow in this specific way, you can usually save a little bit of money as compared to just taking out a fixed rate loan in the first place.
I'm sorry. So you come to me, I'm a bank, and you say, I want to borrow money from you.
Nope, I've already borrowed my money.
Oh, I'm sorry. What am I doing?
You're the person who's going to sell me the interest rate swap.
Oh, I'm selling you a swap. I'm selling you a financial instrument.
So the swap is just an agreement to pay each other different amounts of money. So I'm paying you 4% interest, and you're paying me back an interest rate, which may be higher or may be lower than that 4.
Why would I want to do that?
Well, because you can usually make a lot of money doing it. Well, here's how it works. If the interest rate stays about where it was when we first took out this agreement, then we break even. I'm effectively insured against fluctuating interest rates, and I'm paying you about as much as you pay me, and I pay that amount back to Visa.
Right.
But let's say interest rates would go way up. Then I'm saving a lot of money because I'm only paying you 4%, and you're having to pay me 10, 11%, which I then still have to pay on Visa. So I'm not exactly making money, but I've insured myself against having to pay Visa a lot.
Right.
But here's the catch. What if interest rates go way down? Then I'm paying, and this is what's happening. And this is why organizations like the University of California are losing lots of money on interest rate swaps. What happens if interest rates go down? I'm paying you 4%, but I only have to pay you like 1% at this point, not even. And you're only paying me back that much, right?
Yeah.
So what would have happened had I not taken out an interest rate swap? Let's say I had taken out a fixed rate loan in the first place, say at 5%. It's overwhelmingly likely that I would have been able to refinance that loan at lower rates. So when interest rates plummet to something like 0%, I'm able to refinance that loan. So I'm not paying Visa 5% anymore. I'm paying her 1, 2%. Interest rate swaps invariably have a clause built in that involves exorbitant termination fees, which prevent organizations from refinancing their bonds. They're specifically designed at every point, at every interest rate, to make refinancing more expensive than staying in the interest rate swap agreement.
So what the city of Oakland did?
Sorry, what?
Is that what the city of Oakland did?
That's exactly right.
Oh.
So the city of Oakland is paying out the nose on its interest rate swaps.
Okay.
A number of other cities, counties, states, art museums, universities are all paying out the nose as a result of these interest rate swaps. Yeah.
Do you want questions?
Yeah, I mean, if they're like apropos of a basic understanding of interest rate swaps, definitely, because I'll try and move forward after that. But if they're general questions, I can take them later.
So that's why the Fed is keeping the interest rate really low. So these guys are making the big money, or?
Well, so that's an open question. I think it's harder to say that's why the Federal Reserve is keeping these interest rates low. But it's certainly a consequence of the Fed keeping interest rates low that public organizations have to pay money to Wall Street banks, right? So that's so. If everyone's go ahead.
The Asian Art Museum got out of its toxic.
I'll come to this later.
Okay.
Yeah. So the gist is this. I mean, these interest rate swaps look like a decent way to insure against potentially rising interest rates. But of course, they were a bet that interest rates would not go down. And of course, interest rates did go down, which makes having taken out these interest rate swaps a bad bet. So just to lay out exactly how bad a bet it was, the University of California has to date lost $57 million on its interest rate swap payments. We're losing another $750,000 every month. And if we don't renegotiate them, we stand to lose as much as $200 million as a result of these interest rate swaps. And this is no exception.
Just raise the students' fees.
I'll get to that too. So at the beginning of the talk, I sort of suggested that there's two ways in which financialization threatens public organizations. And one is by exposing them to risk, and the other is by distracting them from what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to tell a story about each of those different ways. And the first is about why interest rates are so low. These swaps wouldn't have been such a bad deal if interest rates hadn't plummeted, but they didn't, which is the question of why did they plummet? And I think we have some pretty good ideas about how that happened. In the first place, there was a massive financial crisis and a deep economic recession. The immediate response to which was the Federal Reserve driving interest rates downward, literally as low as they can go. As far as I understand it, through today, they have no plans to raise them anytime soon. And of course, this action was designed to stimulate more lending and generate a recovery as a result of behavior undertaken by the banks that was at best unduly risky and at worst opportunistic and corrupt. There's a second reason interest rates are so low, and this is criminal. I don't know how much of people have been following the LIBOR manipulation scandal, but the gist of it is that banks are supposed to report the interest rates they intend to charge people, and this is sort of aggregated into an index. And LIBOR is an interbank lending rate. Effectively, it's the rate at which banks lend to one another, but it's also the rate that indexes all different kinds of loans, like student loans, mortgages, and our interest rates.
Credit cards.
That's right. So these banks effectively engaged in price collusion to fix prices in credit, which is to say to drive interest rates down. And this scandal is unfolding day by day. UBS settled for, I think, $2 billion the other day. There have been a number of fines here in the United States against a number of banks who have already proven to have manipulated LIBOR. I think Barclays had fines on the order of $200 million.
But zero criminal charges.
That's exactly right. So this is very important to know. Yeah. So there have been a lot of regulatory fines. There have been a lot of criminal investigations that have invariably resulted in settlements. And there's undoubtedly going to be hundreds of lawsuits, civil suits, by various organizations who suffered as a result of LIBOR manipulation. The University of California is one such organization. The University of California has no plans to pursue LIBOR litigation. They also have no plans to pursue renegotiation of interest rate swaps.
I think it's an important point to make that the same banks that were inducing universities, museums, municipalities into these swap agreements are involved with the Fed and setting interest rates. So they knew the crisis was coming, they knew the direction of the interest rates, and they still induced these institutions into it. So there is a really good case to say that all these swaps were entered into fraudulently and intentionally to, screw the people out of their money and divert it to the banks.
That's exactly right. So Barclays is I think was the first bank to be fined by regulators in the United States. Barclays Capital, through its association with Lehman Brothers, not only brokered but underwrote the bonds to finance development at UC and also brokered the interest rate swaps. So the very same banks that are engaged in the LIBOR manipulation are the very same banks who are selling us these swaps. And I mentioned before.
As a brand new building in Manhattan.
I don't know about that. I do know that our CFO used to work for Lehman and by association.
Is Barclays based in the UK?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So they don't have a strong U.S. presence. They usually their presence was effectively by way of.
Can I ask a question? Is
Yeah.
that the same bank that was laundering money from Iran and also the cartel in Mexico?
Yeah, that was HSBC. So you get this. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that has been surprising for me as I get into all this stuff is that these are just a bunch of guys sitting around a table. I mean, it's just a men's club. there isn't any economics behind any of this stuff. It's how can we make the most money and screw the most people? It's just appalling how arbitrary and small time all of this is.
There's a good movie, Margin Call. Watch Margin Call, and they're all around the table. Margin Call.
So I agree with that story. I think there's an important story to be told about enormous financially savvy institutions preying upon public organizations who are trying to save money and financing basic development. I think that story is very real. I think it's fair. But there's another story, which is I think that the second half of my argument here about financialization, that suggests that actually this is more or less part and parcel of a new way of thinking about how to run a public organization. And that the financial leaders at organizations like the University of California weren't duped. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Right.
And they don't regret it.
Right.
And so that's what I'm going to talk about now, sort of how interest rate swap borrowing, general financial transformations in UC's financial strategy have really had a lot of organizational consequences for the university. And the gist of it is this, that interest rate swaps have been integral to a change in financial strategy at UC that's involved the following. We have a new team of financial leaders, and I'll say a little bit more about them, but you can read in greater detail in our report about who these people are. These swaps have enabled more borrowing by the university, but new types of borrowing to a particularly aggressive mode of borrowing. And that's had the consequence of changing the way money is distributed across the university as an organization. So for example, I suggested that GMAC is a pretty strange wing of General Motors. And the way we think about General Motors is not generally as a finance company. The university is similarly starting to take on a form that doesn't look much like what we think it should look like. So in the last 10 years or so, the university has undergone a pretty drastic transformation in its financial leadership. And that's involved creating a lot of positions in the University of California Office of the President's Office. They've created two new positions, the Executive Vice President for Business Operations and the position of Chief Financial Officer. And those two positions are occupied respectively by one Nathan Brostrom and one Peter Taylor, who I mentioned before are both former executives in the public financing divisions of major U.S. banks, namely JP Morgan and Lehman.
Didn't Obama appoint Peter Taylor to head up his commission on what to cut? I mean, social services to cut, or no?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cat Food Commission.
I'm sorry?
The Cat Food Commission.
Yeah, there you go, the cat food.
And as I suggested before, these people are literally the same people who were in they were leading the subdivisions within these banks that were selling these instruments to public organizations. And the way they are now leading our university is with minimal oversight. I would argue minimal transparency. In writing this report, it was very difficult to understand how financial management at the UC has worked over the last 10 years. But it is clear that the discretion is quite broad, so they're not beholden to very many people. So this has led to a change in the UC's borrowing strategy. The UC's debt load has increased 100%, which is to say it's doubled in 4 years. So from 2007 to 2011, UC's debt went from $7 billion to $14 billion. Most of that borrowing is directed towards what I'll just go ahead and call profit centers, which is to say medical centers, athletic facilities, fancy dorms to attract out-of-state tuition. Some of these investments are tremendously profitable. So UC's medical centers make about $900 million a year in profit. Some of them are less so. I don't know if a football stadium we can't fill, and it wasn't cheap. But either way, the profits that are generated in these profit centers are kept there, which is to say we're borrowing lots of money to generate revenue in certain sectors of the university, but that revenue is reinvested in those sectors like any reasonably capitalistically oriented firm would do.
Rather than going into the general fund.
That's right. So we make a lot of money in medical centers, but we're not using that money to keep undergraduate tuition low. We're using it to build more hospitals.
Yeah.
Now here's the kicker. We've also started borrowing in new ways. When the university wanted to borrow before, it would go to the state assembly and it would say, we need money to do this. The state would issue a general obligation bond, which is to say the bond was backed on the ability of the state to raise taxes, usually property taxes. Now we tend to borrow in a somewhat different way. We borrow using things called revenue bonds, which means that when we say we're going to borrow $100 million and we promise to pay you back, what we put on the line is the revenue that will be generated by whatever investment we're making. So we build a $175 million medical center at UCLA, and we say, this medical center is going to make a lot of money, we're going to pay you back with that money we make. But there's a clause in these contracts that says, if we don't make the money in the medical center, the UC Regents will find a way to pay you back using the discretion they have to generate revenue, which means raising undergraduate tuition.
Wow.
So what's going on is that we're borrowing
undergraduate tuition.
So what's going on is that we're borrowing lots of money on the promise, the implied promise of potentially raising undergraduate tuition. Of course, everyone knows we have been raising undergraduate tuition. Undergraduate tuition has gone up 300% since 2010. We're using that money to invest in athletic facilities, dormitories, and medical centers, which in turn make a lot of money, but that money is not reinvested in what I would identify as UC's core functions, which is providing public education to a diverse body of students who come from California and can get a reasonable education. So that's all I'll say about UC, but just to put it in broader context, in no way is the University of California an exception. States, municipalities, and nonprofits have all defined interest rate swaps. Sorry, not every state, municipality, or nonprofit has bought an interest rate swap, but interest rate swap purchasing is certainly an increasingly characteristic financial strategy of public organizations. And in many cases, they've been so costly to these organizations that they've opted to pay the termination fee to get out of the agreement. Which makes sense if you think that interest rates are going to stay low for a very long time. As of 2010, public organizations have paid $4 billion to terminate interest rate swaps with Wall Street banks. And it's estimated to date that the LIBOR manipulation scandal will cost the public sector another $1 billion in artificially low, which is to say high, interest rate payments. Just a couple examples. Jefferson County, Alabama recently went bankrupt as a direct consequence of exorbitant interest rate payments. They had to lay off 1,000 workers. This is interesting. Harvard, which I don't have tremendous sympathy for, but they've engaged in tremendously aggressive lending with their endowment. They have an unbelievable amount of money tied up in interest rate swaps, and they recently paid $1 billion to terminate their interest rate swaps.
Who was that?
Harvard. This led a former dean of Harvard to say, there's something systematically wrong with the Harvard Corporation. It's too small, too secretive, too closed, and not supported by enough eyeballs looking at the risks they're taking. And so I think this is exactly what we should be worried about when it comes to most public organizations. It's unclear if integration into financial markets is itself a bad thing. It's unclear if it's even preventable. But if public organizations are going to financialize themselves, it needs to be more democratic and transparent, so that they do it not by taking undue risks and losing sight of their core mission. So in the report, we have some recommendations, and they're pretty basic. In the first place, I think the University of California, like other public organizations who have tried to do so, should be trying to renegotiate these interest rate swap agreements. There's been moderate success doing that. The East Asian, we brought up the art museum. Yeah, the East Asian Art Museum in San Francisco successfully renegotiated a swap agreement, but only when they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and the bank didn't want to be held accountable for an art museum going under. So the university isn't on the verge of insolvency, so it's unlikely that we're going to be able to play that card. But a number of other municipalities, like the city of Oakland, are in the process of trying to initiate negotiate. So the city of Oakland is negotiating with Goldman Sachs at the moment. So there's promise, although not exactly a track record of success so far. But I would say there's an interesting precedent in the form of home mortgage renegotiation, which has been a disaster on the whole. But there is at least a precedent for public leadership in demanding that banks sit down at the table and talk in reasonable terms about how to find a workable solution. Our second recommendation is to litigate on the issue of the LIBOR manipulation. As was mentioned before, there have been no criminal indictments, or rather, how should I put this? All criminal investigations have thus far resulted in a settlement. And so I think pursuing the issue in civil suits is going to be an important strategy for public organizations. And then public organizations themselves fight for greater transparency in the way that their finances are managed. But I think, thinking big term, what we're really talking about here is a public organization borrowing money from other public organizations. So when I issued this bond in the first place, I'm a public organization like the University of California, and I'm issuing a bond, and most of the people who are buying my bonds are pension funds, public employee pension funds. So the dynamic is really one where public organizations are trying to lend money between one another, and there's this intermediary, which is the banking system. They have an effective monopoly on the brokerage of these agreements. But it seems to me that we could have some public entity that could be brokeraging these very same types of agreements in such a way that the incentives were not aligned perversely for private banks to effectively treat these as opportunities for extraction. And I think the financial crisis has really pointed to the fact that financial innovation will always outpace financial regulation.
Sorry, say that again.
That financial innovation will always outpace financial regulation. And that's particularly true when it comes to public organizations who aren't supposed to have financial experts on hand. And so I think we'll continue to see these sort of predatory relationships between banks and public organizations until we can replace the banks as the people we have to do business with in the first place. I don't think we're going to be able to hunt them down and prevent them from doing this, or even penalize them for having done it. I think we need to replace them. What? Replace them with a public institution which can mediate between the public institutions which are already lending and borrowing between us. I'll stop there. Did everyone get a report who wanted one?
Thank you, Alex. Now we're going to have Susan Harmon and Beezer DiMartelli. They'll speak for about 15 minutes each, and then we'll go into questions and answers and comments. And Andy did say if we run over 8:30, that's okay. So we'll still have a half hour for questions and comments. My fault for starting late. Okay. Did you want to start first, Susan?
Sure. The city of Philadelphia is in the same kind of situation that Berkeley and Oakland and municipalities and counties all over the country are. And I just wanted to read you a short presentation that one of the members of the Public Banking Institute made at Philadelphia when they were considering, well, he's urging defaulting on their toxic swap. He says, what everyone needs to know is that these losses could have and should have been avoided altogether. Swaps were never necessary to hedge against interest rate fluctuations. For almost 100 years, that insurance was provided by responsible municipal finance managers who employed the technique referred to as laddering. As the Wall Street veteran and widely read columnist Pat Martins explains, to hedge risk, an issuer simply has bonds maturing along a short, intermediate, and long-term yield curves. If rates rise, they're hedged with the intermediate and long-term bonds. If rates fall, the short-term munis will mature and can be rolled over into lower interest rate environment. So there's people hedged against their loans for 100 years, he says, before they were persuaded to engage in these toxic interest rate swaps. And he urges Philly to default. I'm trying to get Oakland to default. I think the United States should default on its debt the way Iceland has. And if you don't know what's going on in Iceland, just Google it. They're the success story of the world right now, because they defaulted on their loan, they jailed the bankers, they rewrote their constitution. They're doing it right, and they're amazingly successful. So that's what we should do. The fiscal cliff is nonsense. I feel like Alex sort of led up to what the solution is: eliminate the middleman. And in most cases around money, eliminating the middleman is the solution. That seems like kind of a casual way of saying it, but the more I track it down into various areas, eliminating the middleman makes sense. So we imagine if pension funds lent directly to the University of Berkeley. I mean, why not? Without the banks intervening. Imagine if we pooled our money and lent directly to each other for mortgages. You must all know about the rolling jubilee that Occupy Wall Street has started.
And tell us something about it. We do know a little bit.
The rolling, what happens with debts when they become uncollectible, when you're clearly not going to pay your credit card debt, they get bundled the way bad mortgages got bundled, and sold at a fraction of their cost, pennies on the dollar. What somebody sophisticated at Occupy Wall Street figured out was we could buy those debts at pennies on the dollar. And what they've done is put the call out to the public, collected enough money to buy millions of dollars worth of debt, and then forgive it. In the old Babylonian tradition of Jubilee, which is in the Bible and is honored by many religions around the world. Every 50 years, traditionally, every 49 years, everything was forgiven. All debts were forgiven, prisoners were let out of jail, land that was sold got given back to its original owners. So Jubilee is another thing to look up when you get home. It's a wonderful tradition that we should be embracing more and more and more.
You say it's in the Bible, it's mentioned in the Bible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it goes back further than the Old Testament. It's Babylonian. Very old and humane tradition. So, public banks. We could start a public bank in a couple of months. We as, again, the Public Banking Institute with whom I work, we initially thought at the state level would be a good way to do this. We tried 20 states are interested at different levels and in different ways in starting public banks. We kind of failed in California. A bill to study the issue, which was wimpy, but the best we thought we could get, passed both houses of the legislature. Jerry Brown vetoed it, saying that if we didn't need a bill, the legislatures could start a study group anytime they wanted to. But our point was that we were trying to get buy-in. So we wanted a bill to pass. We wanted all the legislators to say that this was a good idea. So he kind of missed the political point, or he didn't miss the political point. In any case, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere at the state level in California. Right now, Vermont and Maine may be our most hopeful states. but this is breaking news, that's as of a week ago. So we kind of thought maybe we should move down where legislators were more accessible to us, their constituents. And we now think that the county level is probably a pretty good level for a variety of reasons. One, as I said, it's smaller. I mean, you can get to see your county supervisor much easier than you can your assembly person. And I strongly recommend it. Another reason is because of the mortgage crisis, which Alex mentioned briefly. As you all know, the mortgage foreclosure crisis is a disaster. I don't know about San Francisco, but Alameda County has 43 houses that are in the foreclosure pipe, 4,300, sorry, 4,300 homes that are in the foreclosure pipeline right this minute. The crisis is not over, it's not even half over. It's still as serious as it was, and what the federal government is doing about it is making it worse, not better. So we thought, and also, you know, this public banking, I mean, I'm impressed that there are this many people here to talk about this kind of wonky subject. Most people's eyes glaze over pretty quickly when you talk about public banking and toxic interest rate swaps and this kind of stuff. But everybody knows about foreclosures. So we thought that coming to public banking through a solution that we came up with to solve the foreclosure crisis would get more people's attention. So we're suggesting that counties take properties in foreclosure by eminent domain, that they put out a notice telling the banks that they have 30 days, 60 days to prove they own the properties, which in 80 to 90% of the cases they cannot do because they've broken the chain of title. And at the end of that period, the county takes those properties. I think they should take them for free and forget even giving market value. And because the banks can't prove they own them, they don't own them. They take the mortgages, then the county owns the mortgages, it renegotiates them down to market value for the homeowners. It then gets the mortgage payments, which is income for the county, and it has valuable property in these mortgages that it can use as capital to start a county bank.
You can be the president.
Dolores, that's our 3-minute eminent domain idea. Now, we haven't found any county supervisors willing to do this yet. It's risky. They'd probably be sued by the banks, but good, fine. The banks are beginning to lose on the cases that have come before courts about whether they actually own the properties that they say they do. The tide is, it's about half and half right now, 50-50, and beginning to turn. County recorders around the country are beginning to be successful.
So part of that too as well, right, is that what they do is they packaged all those loans and sold them to us. And that's why they don't have title to them.
Right.
So
They package them and slice and dice, and so nobody knows who they belong to anymore, which is a serious problem in and of itself. That's 400 years of property law that's just been trashed by the banks. I mean, in point of fact, you may have trouble selling your house if you got a loan since 2004, because it's very unclear who owns the mortgage on it. This would, it would clear the title. If the county took it and renegotiated the mortgage, it would be clear that the county owned the mortgage, and that would clear the title, which would be a good thing all around. It's win-win-win except for the banks, and that's fine with me.
So what's the law that would govern eminent domain that the county can just go to is that?
Eminent domain already exists.
Right, but in that situation, it would be that easy to?
Hasn't been tried yet.
Okay.
But, for instance, cities and counties can take over property that's in arrears on taxes, for instance, by eminent domain. I mean, there are precedents. And we've researched it pretty well. We just need county supervisors with the guts to try it. So going back to just public banks, leaving eminent domain aside, although that's brought in the support of all the housing organizers, which is wonderful community support. There are lots of good reasons for public banks, but I think the one that I use with legislators, because it's immediately accessible, is interest. Right now, there's an English economist named Margaret Kennedy, who has done the research and figured out that 40% of anything goes to interest. Anything. This pen, when you buy this pen, 40% of the price is the interest built into it that it took to make the pen. Somebody had to buy land and pay a bank interest to buy that land. Somebody had to put up a factory and pay interest on what it took they borrowed from the bank to put up the factory. They had to borrow money to buy the raw materials, et cetera, et cetera. 40% of anything. So when you start thinking about public works, the Bay Bridge, for instance, 40% of the cost of the bridge is going to the banks in interest. A public bank, if there were a Bank of California, could borrow from the Fed at zero, essentially 0% interest, because it's a bank. It's not the state of California, which borrows at whatever outrageous interest rates we borrow at. It's a bank. Banks borrow from each other at 0% interest.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So the state of California could borrow at 0% interest, which means we could double what we do with our money overnight. Just think for a minute about what that could mean. The whole issue about how money is created, which we also, I guess Michael Hudson talked about it a little bit. That, I think, is unbelievable. And I know it's taken me months and months and months to really get my head around that. That banks, occasionally I think about defaulting on my mortgage and feel a little guilty that I wouldn't be paying my bank back. But they didn't spend any money to give me my mortgage. They didn't go down into their vault and take out $300,000 and hand it to me. They just made an entry on their books. Money is created by banks every time they make a loan. That is how money is created. But I don't try to persuade politicians about that, because they just kind of, it's the end of the conversation. They don't believe it. And it's unbelievable. It's one of those pieces of all this that's unbelievable in this hundreds and hundreds of year old scam. Jeffrey.
Susan, you said you thought that this public banking and the powerful ideas behind it should be taken to the supervisors. I agree, but I think what's needed is that people become informed so that it's actually a demand of the public, that it's based in the population, not a plea that the supervisor get on board, but rather a demand because people know too much. As you said about the 40% of the pen, that people just know too much to have this thing continue.
Well, I was going to make an appeal to this crew to, march on City Hall and tell their supervisors to start doing eminent domain. I mean, that's the emergency. That's what they should do first, to stop the foreclosures. But we are negotiating with Avalos, and he is very eager to do this. So I guess we're gonna give him a little more time. He's just moving very, very, very slowly and cautiously.
He wants to run for mayor.
I don't recommend getting out the pitchforks quite yet, but soon. Yeah.
So As of right now, I believe San Francisco puts its money in Union Bank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America.
Spreads it around.
And I was wondering, could you tell us some of the pros and cons of having our money in these private banks as opposed to having a municipal bank? What would be some of the benefits, and what are some of the problems with having our money in these private banks?
Well, the pros are that there's nowhere else to put it right now. There isn't a community bank that's big enough. Credit unions are limited in size by law. They can't do it. I haven't talked to the community banks in San Francisco, but in Oakland, I know that none of them want to take the city's money. So the pro is that they know how to deal with it, and there isn't a substitute yet. But San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, I don't know who else around the state, have all passed resolutions, city councils have all passed resolutions to divest from the big banks. In Berkeley and Oakland, it's mostly Wells Fargo. San Francisco, again, does spread it around, which is good policy. But there's no reason to be using the Wall Street banks, except that there isn't a big enough public bank to take their money. So that's another very good reason for starting a public bank.
Well, my question is, let's say theoretically there was a municipal bank in San Francisco, how would that be better for the city of San Francisco as opposed to having it in these three big banks?
First of all,
Besides
borrow
the
money
interest.
at 0% interest. Yeah. And lend it to the city at 0% interest.
Because I'm part of a group in Occupy, we're really interested in looking at trying to push for a municipal bank. And I would just like to learn more about it and learn some of the talking points of why. And people say, well, why would you want to do that? I've read some stuff that Pablo said about, but
I would just talk about interest. I mean, everybody knows about interest. Everybody has paid interest. You don't have to get into elaborate, abstruse banking to make that point. San Francisco could borrow money at 0% interest.
But don't the three banks also charge San Francisco a lot of fees that we have to end up paying as taxpayers and stuff like that?
Well, there would have to be fees to do some of the things that they do. I mean, there was a hearing, I think almost a year ago, and someone from the city testified and said that most of the business they do with banks is around credit cards, because we're all paying, we're paying our parking tickets and our taxes with credit cards now. So that's a big piece of what they do. I mean, there'd be fees, there have to be people running the city bank, even if it's a public bank. So there'd have to be some fees, but we would not have to pay the interest and fees that we pay to the private banks, no. And then they don't invest back here. They send their money to China. We want to keep our money home.
Susan, I don't think you should get that simplistic.
Yes.
Interject a point here. I've actually been working with Pablo and Mark Armstrong and some other people, and just, this stuff does get really wonky and, very, very quickly. It's not true that banks always can borrow from one another at 0% interest. That's true right now, more or less, but that's not a general view of how banks work or how banks can access loans from the Federal Reserve. The simple way to think of it is the Federal Reserve can set that rate at which banks borrow from one another at any rate it wants.
Right.
So when we hear about the Federal Reserve has decided to set rates at 1% point, they have enormous latitude to set short-term rates. And that short-term rate is the rate that banks borrow at.
Right.
There are limits. A bank cannot freely borrow at the Federal Reserve under normal circumstances without coming under some kind of scrutiny. So there are limits. I just want to say that I think we need to not get into the idea that somehow there's all this money that San Francisco just borrow and invest. I do want to say though that I think the important thing is about thinking about how we can create a more democratic, accountable system of finance. I think that's really what, and whether we do it through a bank or whatever, that it's really a different vision, right, of all these points have been raised about, how we use money, how we create money. There are some problems, I think, in terms of starting a local municipal bank that we're trying to figure out, and hopefully we'll flesh that out. But there are, again, it gets complicated, but there are certain limits. I mean, the one advantage that large banks offer to the city is that there are actually government codes that require that when the city puts a deposit into Wells Fargo, that Wells Fargo does what's called collateralize that deposit. And what that means is that in theory, Wells Fargo set aside assets that if the city needs the monies, the Wells Fargo B of A can guarantee those deposits. And so there are certain complexities in terms of, and I think that this is part of why we need to think about changing perhaps legislation or other things. So it gets complicated, but I think it's a great idea. I'm spending a lot of time working on it right now, and there are in California, there do appear to be some limits. The city cannot, for instance, just own a bank. It can't buy stock. There are very, very clear limits on what the city can and cannot do with its investments. And they seem to prohibit the city buying stock in the bank. So that's, there's a lot of things kind of at the state level that we might have to think about changing. So anyway, this is probably more detailed than people really want to get into, but those are just some of the things.
Can we hold, I mean, I really appreciate that. That was very helpful, but can we move on to, after Susan's done, to our last speaker, and then have our questions, answers, and discussion, so that we hear a chance for everyone to speak. And did you want to comment on?
I haven't been part of the negotiations with Avalos lately, so I don't know where he is on constitutionality. We think that it's not an issue, but as I say, you may have dug up stuff lately that I don't know about, and I will find out. Obviously, it's complicated, but in the end, it's pretty simple. I mean, he mentioned accountability. The board of a public bank would be public people. It could be government officials, it could be community activists, it could be community bankers, but in any case, it would be responsive to us, unlike Wall Street. I mean, it's just responsive to no one. Sorry?
Sorry, you're talking about a state bank right now, correct? Is that what the...
We're talking about all three levels,
Okay.
city, county, and state.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have Elizabeth. Do you mind telling me? These are. Thank you, Susan. And she's from Berkeley, working on the debt resistance movement.
Yeah, so I wanted to say thank you to everybody for having me. Thanks to Ketal and to the speakers. I feel quite honored to be part of this panel and to be among such knowledgeable guests. You people are clearly super inspired and intelligent. So I'm a student of music, and it's a field of scholarship. Yeah, right. It's quite distant from economics and business, and yet here I am, and here we are. And so in the years following the financial crisis in 2008, leading up to the Occupy movement, many individuals just like me felt this growing anxiety about our inability to answer basic financial questions, like some of the ones that have come up tonight, about the institutions for which we've worked, the schools in which we were being educated, and the municipalities in which we were living. In an attempt to learn something, we began reading a little more widely, consulting knowledgeable community members, and starting open-ended conversations in our localities. We educated each other and ourselves, asking what we might be able to learn and do from the positions in which we found ourselves. In the process, studying music, theater, or accounting, or for that matter, hosting educational forums like this, or taking free lessons in permaculture and street medic care, have become potential sites of transformation and radical knowledge sharing. So here I am, and here we are. This small narrative on student debt resistance grows out of that perspective. One where we are all sharing lessons as students and educators in emergent, non-conventional classrooms like this one. Much but not all of the information I'll share today comes from the Debt Resisters Operations Manual, and that's a freely available text collectively and anonymously assembled by members of Occupy Wall Street and Strike Student Debt, and that's the group that's sort of launched these rolling jubilees that you mentioned. Its writers tell us that, quote, "We are under no moral obligation to keep our promises to liars and thieves. In fact, we are morally obligated to find a way to stop this system rather than continuing to perpetuate it. To the financial establishment of the world, we have only one thing to say. We owe you nothing. To our friends, our families, our communities, to humanity, and to the natural world that makes our lives possible, we owe you everything." End quote. To begin, I want to position the student debt resistance movement in a global context, and that is with the growing uprising against neoliberalism. This set of policies and its modes of governmentality has profoundly restructured our schools, as Alex mentioned, embedding them ever more deeply into the abyss of financialization and business management. We're now witnessing later stages of the deterioration of public institutions, or possibly transformation, of all kinds, which have been subjected to an aggressive pace of privatization, and it's been painful on many levels. The neoliberal state, a tool for private interests more often than not, has not only enabled, but even abetted the process. Public financial support for public schools has been shrinking since well before the 2008 crisis, forcing or allowing schools, depending on who's speaking, to seek other means of funding, often with far fewer restrictions. Since the mid-1980s, public college costs have risen by 500%, far outpacing the rate of inflation. At the UCs, where I'm also a student like Alex, fees have risen by nearly 250% since 2004 alone, leaving vulnerable students to settle the balance. But how? And when basic student resources, like libraries, classes, and daycare, are being cut, we must ask, what are these rising costs buying and for whom? When American wages have stagnated or declined for most people since the 1970s, who can afford these skyrocketing costs? Who do these prices automatically lock out of our schools? The answers to those questions are ugly. Many of us have been forced to turn to lenders for education loans. 2/3 of college students now graduate with an average debt of $27,000 and into an increasingly dismal job market. This situation disproportionately impacts students of color and women, whose likelihood of requiring a loan is higher, and whose opportunities for decent wages that would allow them to repay these debts are significantly slimmer. Predators are on the hunt. Since the 1990s, public institutions have formed what some have termed an unholy alliance with private interests, I think really well illustrated by Alex, where many of the executives, regents, and trustees at our schools sit on boards of banks, enabling an immense concentration of political and financial capital. Take, for example, Richard Blum, UC's Alpha Regent and partner of Senator and chairperson of the U.S.'s Select Committee on Intelligence, Dianne Feinstein. Blum owns, among so much else, ITT Educational Services and Career Education Corporation, the world's second largest for-profit education company. Blum, whose investment firm lists Bank of America among its many clients. Blum, who is using rising tuition to finance expensive construction projects contracted out to the world's largest real estate brokerage firm, which he also owns. Blum, who was a majority owner of 2 war contractors that build weapons components with which UC contracted projects under Blum's guidance. I digress, but you see the picture, I think.
Can I add one?
Sure, yeah, please.
His real estate, yes, I just got, these are just wonderful. Just got one the other day. His real estate company is the company that has the national contract to sell off our post offices.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of, he's got his hands in many dirty cookie jars. It's a really special kind of story. But more humble corners of colleges and universities have also been significantly impacted by these kinds of alliances. For example, university financial aid officers now work more and more closely with private lenders, where banks award officers with all kinds of kickbacks for signing students up for large, virtually unrepayable loans. These kinds of shady private loans are on the rise, set to outpace federal loans in just a decade or two, though the federal option is hardly more kind. In 2012, student debt reached, as many of you probably have heard, over $1 trillion, Through speculation on indebted students' state of poverty, the appropriately acronymed SLAB market, which stands for Student Loan Asset-Backed Securities, has jacked up the worth of this debt to $2.67 trillion. As if this deal weren't sweet enough for banks, lenders have been legally awarded lots of collection powers to garnish wages, tax returns, Social Security payments, and even disability wages. Furthermore, since 2005, student loans, public or private, have become ineligible for bankruptcy, meaning that these special burdens can haunt and indenture us for lifetimes. We're now entering an era of massive default. 41% of the class of 2008 has joined the 4 to 5 million Americans who've defaulted on student loan repayments. But through the strange logic of late capitalism, where debt has become the major commodity in which Wall Street traffics, default actually translates into profit in the form of interest, late payment fees, and all manner of hidden charges. This industry has been quite lucrative for lenders, who make an average of 120% back on each defaulted loans. Predators indeed. I will spare you about the ways in which campus and local police have become an integral part of the story of debt extraction. It's quite depressing. But while this larger picture of the student loan industry is foundationally important as a tool for us, sharing this knowledge is not my ultimate goal. Rather, I want to focus instead on some of the many beautiful projects and ideas that have begun to spring up in the face of this Goliath. Inspired by similar assemblies that have taken place in New York since June, in October, students at UC Berkeley launched a series of weekly debtors' assemblies. On our campus, these assemblies were spaces of collective conversation about the many forms of debt that intersect our campuses and our lives. Holding them on the lawn in front of California Hall, an administrative building where many privatizing decisions have been made, we gathered and listened to stories about personal hardships and strategies of resistance from individuals variously positioned within the student debt nexus who shared their bits of the puzzle. Like each space we've created over the past year, this one had a particular character: intimate, disturbing, illuminating. Among the other inspiring resistors is Occupy Student Debt, a group that's established the following guiding principles. Public education, pre-kindergarten through university, must be publicly funded. Current student loans are to be absolved immediately, and future student loans offered at 0% interest. And all school and public institutions must open their books and engage in transparent and accountable financial practices. In addition, recognizing the vulnerability of individuals who pursue debt strikes independently, Occupy Student Debt has started a signature gathering campaign of individuals who will collectively agree to stop repaying their loans once 1 million people have signed on. We're anxiously awaiting those signatures to tally. One of the most inspiring recent stories to emerge from the student struggle, the local struggle that is the announcement of Cal State's tuition rollback. While this victory didn't abolish current student debt, it does effectively eliminate some future debt by lowering the cost of education. While this victory no doubt owes much to the passage of Proposition 30, it has a longer story of years of student protests on campus and at CSU Board of Trustee meetings. These are promising directions for the kinds of struggles I think we should be taking up. Let me be clear. I don't believe that any one of these emergent campaigns contains all of the solutions to debt, but I have drawn, personally, an immense amount of inspiration from the knowledge that people are starting to imagine forms of resistance and alternatives to this system of debt hostages. Our best ideas are likely yet to be hatched in rooms full of people just like ourselves. I want to close with a statement from the Debt Resisters Operations Manual. quote, "Every dollar we take from a fraudulent subprime mortgage speculator, every dollar we withhold from the collection agency is a tiny piece of our own lives and freedom that we can give back to our communities. These are acts of debt resistance, which come in many other forms as well. Fighting for free education and healthcare, defending a foreclosed home, demanding higher wages, and providing mutual aid. This last gesture is perhaps the most significant of all for me. No matter how we engage these struggles, no matter what terrain we fight on, we foremost need to understand that we're building networks of mutual aid and drawing inspiration from each other as we reimagine how else we might live and learn together."
Thank you so much. Well, now, the speakers, are you willing to take some questions? We usually call it questions, answers, and comments for about 10 minutes, if that's okay with everyone. And then we'll have a few minutes for announcements. Do you want to just call directly on the speakers?
Sure. Yeah. The debt resistors manual that you mentioned, do you know where it is? How could I get a copy of it?
Oh, yeah, it's free. If you just Google Debt Resistors Operations Manual or any combination really of most of those words, it's like the first thing that'll come up. It's a PDF that you can download.
Oh, okay. And I have a friend in New York City who I was talking to the other night, and he said that Occupy, I guess nationally, is taking this kind of new movement, has taken Occupy into a new direction of being concerned, of proposing before the entire American people what the banks are getting away with and how we're all debt-ridden. And is that right? Is Occupy taking this new direction? And if it is, what would be the next activity of Occupy, either on the Berkeley campus or I have friends who go to UC Berkeley in the music department, and also in San Francisco. So,
is there anybody in the room who can answer that? Yeah.
Just briefly, I think there's starting to become a real need within many of us in Occupy to start to develop real goals. And it's obvious with the enthusiasm here that this is a goal that we really need to consider, not just as a protest, but a continued campaign. That what we've done before is, we had a huge protest, it was great, but we didn't continue. So we're looking at strategies, and I think the strategies that you guys are doing at Berkeley is a perfect example.
That's fantastic.
Other questions?
Well, it's just a bit back to a previous topic about eminent domain. I remember way back to '77, they had this big campaign around the International Hotel and tried to get an eminent domain. It didn't work. Has anything changed since then that you think it'll work better this time around?
Well, we're trying to get supervisors to step up and do this. I mean, this wouldn't be a community taking, not a squatters operation. This would be government using its powers to take back property from the banks.
I have a quick question that on that as well too. So usually it's the sheriff's department that actually enforces the evictions.
Yes.
So some of us probably know the new sheriff, or some of the people here know the sheriff. Currently we have. Has there been any discussions that you know of where the department might at some point in the future not do that, not actually forcibly evict folks out of there on behalf of the banks?
The sheriffs are elected. They don't seem to report to anybody. In fact, there are several officials at the county levels who are elected who don't seem to report to anybody. It's the DA, the sheriff, the county recorder, all are elected by us, so we have to wait another 4 years to vote them out if they're doing bad stuff. I haven't worked with the sheriff in San Francisco. I've met with the sheriff in Alameda, along with Just Cause. We sat down with him, and he just said, if a court tells me to evict somebody, I have to do it. There is a sheriff named Chris Connolly in New Hampshire who has said he will not enforce foreclosures anymore, that he believes what several reporters around the country have said, which is these are fraudulent, the banks are submitting fraudulent documents, and he has simply refused to evict people based on them. I don't think he's gotten much support yet, but you could all write to Chris Conley in
New Hampshire.
I forget which county. In New Hampshire, I forget which county he's the sheriff of right now.
There are also municipalities that have passed ordinances prohibiting their sheriffs from following through on foreclosures, provisional on some conditions. For example, Philadelphia, for a
By the way,
while,
thank you, Sheriff Canines.
was disallowing their sheriffs from executing foreclosures until banks had sat down with mortgage borrowers in good faith and tried to reach a renegotiation settlement. We're not relying on the good faith of sheriffs. There are ways to get them to do what we want them to do.
Marina was Green Party. I mean, he might be worth talking to. The sheriff. At one point was Green Party.
Which sheriff?
Macarimi.
Oh, here.
Yeah, he was at one time. He's Democrat now, but
I can talk to him. I'll talk to him.
he's too busy grandstanding on gun control at the moment.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt for a second, because the working group Space Transformers is here, and they have an important announcement to make, but they have to run, so do you guys mind if we have them step in and make an announcement?
So we might be dealing with an eviction as early as Wednesday. Sheriff Ross Macarimi and the Sheriff's Department might come and evict Kezar Gardens, Hank Recycling Center.
When is this supposed to happen?
So Sheriff Ross Macarimi, the Sheriff's Department might come evict Kezar Gardens and the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council's Recycling Center from Golden Gate Park as early as Wednesday. We were thinking it'd be more like the beginning of January, but now we're hearing that it might be Wednesday. So we're having a slumber party tomorrow night. We're starting around 7 o'clock at Kezar Gardens, 780 Frederick Street in Golden Gate Park. So if people can bring food to share and instruments, play music all night, and you can bring camping materials if you need, sleeping bags, tents, things like that to stay warm. And people will be staying until Wednesday morning. We usually do our workday Wednesdays at 1 p.m. every Wednesday, so we'll be like going into that on Wednesday. We've so far built a rainwater catchment system and a greenhouse out of all like recycled, repurposed materials on the site. And we want to keep doing that, like creating an ecology center there. The long-term goal is to facilitate a community visioning process of what that space should be that includes the gardeners and recyclers and neighbors that already use the site, as well as other people who are interested in it, and have a direct and democratic process for coming up with how that site will evolve in the future. But the more immediate thing is to prevent the city from evicting the space in itself. So we welcome people to come out and join us for this slumber party on Tuesday night into Wednesday, and for ones that we'll have in the future. So we have a text blast system set up and email notifications in various ways that people can stay informed on the gatherings that we'll be having there. So Sarah's handing out invitations to the slumber party. I have a few of these flyers left with the text blast and like email notification systems on them. So if anyone wants one of those, just raise your hand. And we'll try to keep everyone informed.
Do you mind if I just keep you because I have your email?
Say again?
What is the HANC then?
So yeah, Hank is Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council. And they've had a recycling center that's operated in Golden Gate Park for 32 years now. They turned it into a community garden and native plant nursery, and it's mostly being evicted because they're trying to get homeless people out of the park. It's like a gentrification issue. People doing the eviction have been really clear about that, even in the media. Like they would rather not see people pushing shopping carts around, and they think that if they get rid of the recycling center, they'll get rid of homeless appearing people in Golden Gate Park.
Yeah, right.
So that's really like their motivation, and they've been pretty clear about that. They're evicting a community garden so they can put in a community garden controlled by Park and Rec with $250,000 of taxpayer money, Whereas the community garden that's there now is completely funded by the recycling operation, so it's like a really self-sustaining phenomenon.
I ain't give a lot of money to the community.
So that's pretty much it. Are there other questions?
Thanks a lot, Ryan. You know, we really need to kind of
Yeah,
continue.
great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
More questions?
Oh, no, I just have an announcement, but go ahead. Sorry.
We're gonna do announcements before we
At the
leave,
end,
and
yeah.
we need to leave pretty soon, so.
I have a question over here.
Yes,
North Dakota, the big bank, is it a kind of a model? Is it
I have one of those small ones.
yes. Bank of North Dakota's been around for 100 years, 1919 it started. And it started at a time very similar to this one. It was in response to Wall Street banks foreclosing on farms. Wall Street banks owned the grain elevators and they were charging outrageous prices. So the legislature in a very conservative state started a public bank, and it exists to this day. North Dakota has the lowest foreclosure rate in the country, lowest unemployment, lowest bank failure, lowest credit card default. It's,
They go Republican?
yes, they do. It's a Republican state.
Yep, very
It
Republican.
wasn't in 1919, there was a very strong populist movement then. But it is a republic, the Republicans, as they came to power, decided to hang on to it. Yeah, it is our model. It's not perfect, and we don't have to use it as a model, but it's the only one that exists.
Is that the only one? Is there a couple others, or?
There's a very small one on an Indian reservation. But 40% of the countries in the world have public banks. We're, as usual, a little behind. 40%.
Of the countries in the world, wow.
Germany, New Zealand,
Wow.
Japan.
Yeah.
We're
Yes, of course.
not progressive.
Hey, just to be a devil's advocate here, what is the difference between, let's say, if we were to initiate a city-owned bank or a government-owned bank, wouldn't there be a problem with the same people from the private banks ending up in those jobs and being a part of the same economic system that's created our problems in the first place? How would those checks and balances take place?
I mean, I didn't speak on this issue before, but I wonder, I mean, public accountability seems to be the major hinge here. Like, we don't vote for the CEOs and the major shareholders of, you know, like JP Morgan Chase. We have no access. They even denied access to Occupy sort of protesters who tried to buy shares in order to gain access to the meetings to have some kind of voting, some kind of like a voting position in those meetings. And it's a very closed circuit, and potentially with like a sort of public institution that could be publicly elected people. I mean, of course, that's not exactly a foolproof solution. That there's certainly problems within elections in the U.S.
The way the Bank of North Dakota works is that it's run by bankers, but we have community banks and credit unions, and we could find, surely we can find people to manage the bank, the good people in the banking world, and there are many. The One Pacific, I mean, the community banks in the Bay Area are terrific, as a matter of fact. And the governance structure is up to us. I would think there would be some elected officials on it, if it were a county of San Francisco, some supervisors, but I would hope the public would be very represented on it.
Do we have other questions or comments?
When is the next event about? Is this Occupy San Francisco and Occupy Berkeley?
This is Occupy Forum, which is a group of people from Occupy San Francisco and Occupy Bay Area United. And so we're a working group. And Occupy, I don't know. We're Occupy Forum. So we usually have events every Monday night.
Monday?
Yeah, every Monday. We will not be
next week.
having,
Next 2 weeks.
next Monday night is Christmas Eve, and the Monday after that is New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
So we will resume on January 7th, and we do need a new home, as we said. So if anyone has ideas, please contact us. We may actually have our first forum of the year on January 7th at the Kezar Gardens, where the recycling center and the gardens are. And so if you would like information, you can sign up for our email list. And I also have a text list where I notify people. So if you'd like to get on my text list, come see me after. And are there any other questions or comments?
Oh, just to clarify what she said, Occupy the Forum is autonomous from any other group, Occupy or otherwise.
So, do you have a subject yet for the January 7th?
It's probably going to be on issues of sustainability and issues of homelessness, which are related to the situation at Kezar Gardens. We're still working on developing the panel.
Is it time for announcements, or are we still on question and answer?
We're still on questions and comments. Brian? Or Sherry, did you have one?
It's to circulate. We're going to be putting on a forum, and the first project is taking over the banks. So I just wanted to circulate a sign up if you're interested in getting information about that. And it's going to be based on Gandhi's threefold path and building a transformational community, of which the first part is to transform the banks. So the dates are, I've got flyers on here. If you're interested in getting information, I'm just going to circulate it. Please put on your name and email, and I don't want to take away from just to know that that's what this is, and please feel free to help yourself to a flyer if you're interested. It doesn't say on here that banking is the first project, so banking is the first project.
Okay, Brian had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask real quickly. First of all, I was going to ask all three of this. Where do you guys actually bank? And as we know, with your money, some of the other Occupy things are going on, and of course in some other areas as well, with the banking stuff here in San Francisco. What do you want to tell folks? What do you want to tell other folks out there? Where to move your money from?
You know, credit union.
Put it in. Who should we take it out from? And some of those kind of things.
You should move your money from the big Wall Street banks, and you all know who they are. Chase, B of A, Wells Fargo, and
Citicorp.
Citi, right?
U.S. Bank?
Well, it's really those four. And move them, I would say, to a credit union. I know the day when I finally got my act together enough to take my money out of close my Citi account and move it to a credit union. I just felt wonderful. Mm-hmm. It's a terrific feeling. And we were very effective. That was almost a year ago that we had the big Move Your Money Day. And they felt it. And it's still going on. People are moving their money, and the banks are reacting. They're hurting. We are hurting.
I'd like to suggest that you move your money into the San Francisco Firemen's Credit Union. They are open to anybody that lives in the city, and tremendous service, low rates, all kinds of good activities and stuff. It's open to everybody that lives in the city. The firemen have had this for so long, and those JKs keep putting the money in, and they're only loaning it back to themselves until they started piling up more money, and what the hell can we do with it? So they opened it up to everybody that lives in the city, and it's really good. There's there's San Francisco Firemen's Credit Union.
Name again?
Community Trust.
And they're one of the best in the nation of credit unions.
Community Trust as well in the mission. They're actually a community development credit union, and they give 82% of their money actually to low poor people. Those are the people that are actually in there, so it actually stays more within the community. So that's also an alternative, community development credit unions. I'd love to put my money.
Is it okay, really briefly, Brian, if you could give us a rundown on what you're working on right now?
Well, I'll just be really brief, I guess, then. I actually met Susan quite some time ago, and she introduced me to her boss, which is great. Thank you guys for that. We're working on creating a community development credit union here in San Francisco. Have been for a year, and it's called People's Reserve Credit Union. And so
we are working on creating a social alternative to be able to reinvest resources within our own community here, and done quite a bit of advancement on that cause up to date. peoplesreserve.org. Find more information out, but we're working for solutions as well. There's a number of, I've talked with Mark a number of times. Armstrong, he's a great man, and for the Public Bank Institute. And I think there needs to be a combination of a number of things, because I'm also very supportive of public banks and with a narrow purpose. And it does, she totally hits the note about interest. Interest is a huge problem. And there is still interest because it is debt-based. This is a debt-based currency in the way that we work. However, if you support local things and part of the multiplier factor is you want to help lift the floor, you're still going to have to charge some money, but all you need is enough money to come back and cover your basic expenses. The rest of that money needs to be reinvested in the community, and it shouldn't be paid out in big bonuses and fat paychecks and all the other things.
So I think we have one more question, and then two more questions, and then we'll close. Rob?
Back to the banking. Do you know many people that have successfully challenged the MERS type of robo-signing foreclosures and won? I mean, I've heard of a few cases, but I mean, it seems like that should be widespread because by law, they can't foreclose if they don't have a legal title.
There hasn't been a federal suit yet. There have been suits in various states. So state by state, people are winning suits finally.
Is that something that could get momentum if we started informing people about
Sure,
that?
absolutely.
That seems like the simplest solution. Just say, no, we own the bank. We don't owe you anything because you entered into a fraudulent loan.
Well, that would be part of our eminent domain proposal.
Good news, Senator Elizabeth Warren is appointed to the Senate Banking Committee. Yay! The banks are scared.
Yeah, they were lobbying heavily against her.
One more question?
Oh, yes. I wonder, because I kind of agree with the fellow who spoke earlier about, we need to become a movement. And I was just wondering if we all in this room or you all had a discussion perhaps about reaching out to more oppressed communities in this city, like, the Hunters Point, Ingleside area, because those people, obviously, they're in great threat of losing their homes. I don't know if it's as bad as Alameda, but, and I was just wondering, have we all had that conversation perhaps about reaching out to poorer places in the city?
That's a great idea. We definitely should put that.
Foreclosure fighters.
Yeah, foreclosure fighters. I know that Bayview, Hunters Point, they've been hit hard by foreclosures.
It's definitely a subject that comes up frequently. There are some, efforts to do that. We as Occupy, we need more people. Come join us. Come help us.
Yeah, right.
There's so many things that we want to do, but we're all volunteer. So we need help, as many people as possible. Ruthie is working with a group called Green for All, which works on a lot of the environmental justice issues in Hunters Bay Point.
Yeah, Green Action.
And we are going to, that's one of our upcoming forums, is going to be a forum on environmental justice issues that are affecting underprivileged communities where they get dumped with, the power plants and the waste, and how we can fight back and join together.
Would we have that forum
do that.
in the old Opera House, maybe on 3rd Street? Would that be?
It's a great
Come
idea.
talk to us. We need.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much to all those. Do you want to comment?
Three what next things. There are flyers, there should be enough still.
There's plenty.
Flyers back there on the table, good. We're having our second annual national conference. Will be in the spring, probably in June in San Rafael. Invite all of you to come. And the third is, read Ellen Brown's book, which is called Web of Debt. It will blow your mind. It's absolutely appalling. The history of banking and what they have been doing to us for hundreds of years. It's staggering.
That is crazy.
Your website as well has a lot of information on it,
Yes.
a lot of research.
Publicbankinginstitute.org.
Web of Debt was also highly recommended by James Smith, our speaker, who had to cancel.
Yeah, we were gonna show the video on the Web of Debt, but it was a little long, the interview with Ellen Brown, but definitely check it out on YouTube as well. There's a few interviews with her. Clark?
Yeah, tomorrow morning, or not tomorrow morning, but tomorrow at 12 noon at Market and Grant Street. There will be seniors action against Wells Fargo and foreclosures, and that'll be at Market at Grant at 12 noon. So if you're in San Francisco tomorrow, come down to the Financial District and join us. That's from 12 until 1:30 p.m. at Market and Grant at the old Wells Fargo building. Tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Any other?
Other announcements? Any other announcements?
Yeah, I'm gonna write you down
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Susan, Alex, Steve.
And thank you, viewers, for watching. Everybody, thanks for restreaming our Sharp Canines. You're always welcome to do so.
Along with what's going on with co-ops in the city at an upcoming forum. You can find our forum information on www.obau.org or occupysf.org.
All right. Anyway, as usual, this video or this live stream will be reposted to youtube.com/Clark Sullivan, or you can just Google Freeman Sullivan and you will find all the videos there. I will be back tomorrow for 12 noon action at Wells Fargo, so join us then. And thanks a lot for watching, and stay active. Bye-bye.